Alright, welcome back. So, for this video, we are going to focus on just one family. And it's a pretty large and important family that happens to be one of my favorites, and many other people's favorites as well. So, let's get to it and learn about Rosaceae. So many members of Rosaceae can actually be found in the vegetable garden. So there are a lot of edibles in this family, and we've got quite a few. And here's a common one, the genus Karya, the strawberry. So if we look at its flowers, it has a pretty typical rose flower, basically. So 5 parts, 5 petals, 5 sepals, although that looks like it has multiples, and multiple stamens. So if you look for those characteristics, you should be able to identify Rosaceae. We're here at the Center for Urban Horticulture at UW Botanic Gardens, and this is Goodfellow Grove. And it is a grove of our next plant that we are studying in Rosaceae. And this grove is composed of the genus Amelanchier, or service berries. To identify Amelanchier, really it's the growth habit. It's a small, could be a small tree really, but typically a large shrub, as you can see from this grove of them. But if you look closely at the fruit, which should be present right now, they look like little rose hips. So, and even the leaves themselves actually look like they're roses infested with powdery mildew and black spot. But anyway, you want to look for the 5 parts that make up Rosaceae and the growth habit. So this to compare it to a rose, so you don't mistake it for a rose, it's well, it doesn't have thorns, and the growth habit too, but the foliage really is very similar to a Rosa or even Prunus actually, but Prunus wouldn't have like the cluster of fruit like you see here. They're more, like the cherries, but here they're born in clusters. So yeah, this is the genus Amelanchier in Goodfellow Grove here at the Center for Urban Hort. Now, a somewhat overlooked member of Rosaceae is the genus Anomalies, or the flowering quince. So as you can see, it's mostly spent, and of course red is a very difficult color to capture on camera. But flowering quinces tend to be overlooked because you'll see them blooming early in the season, and when they're not in bloom, it's kind of this nondescript, shrub that no one really gives much attention to. But if you do need to identify it, let's say for an exam without flowers, it does have very interesting leaf morphology that I want to point out. So you can see the flowers, or excuse me, the foliage, the alternate leaf arrangement, very rosaceous. But look at the secondary leaves, the petiolate secondary leaves there at the base of each leaf. So that's pretty typical of Anomalies. Sometimes you'll see fruit from the flowers developing, and they can be pretty variable shrubs. Sometimes they'll stay low, like this particular selection. Sometimes they get really tall and twiggy, and occasionally you will encounter spines on these. But right now you can see it's still in bloom, but finishing up for the season. But definitely pay attention to the foliage and the unique leaf morphology that it has to be able to identify this particular genus. Alright, let's look at this tree. It's another member of Rosaceae, and it is the genus Crataegus, the Hawthorns. So if you look closely, again, let's look for those diagnostic traits. 5 petals, multiple stamens, and it's a little hard to see the calyxes, but let's pick one and observe. Count them. 1, 2, 3. Focus. fourth looks nibbled, and there's a fifth one, trust me. So yes. So the hawthorns are an interesting group of trees. They're classically rosaceous, as you can see. They're known for their wonderful fruit, but I have to look at the tag to see which particular one this is. But oh my gosh, the flowers reek. Ugh. So the key to Crataegus and the hawthorns, there's quite a few on your list, and to be honest, I've not really studied all of them very closely, but pretty much it's a rosaceous tree, but unlike your Malus or Pyrus. So, you know, if you can distinguish your apples and pears and cherries, then you can think, oh, you know, I'm pretty sure it's not any of those because I know those, then you might be looking at a Crataegus. So with Crataegus, one thing to look for are the clusters of flowers and inflorescences, and of course the fruit later in the season. But the hawthorns are also quite prickly, and they do have thorns. Some species more evident, more painful than others. But if you were to just look at this is your classic look, I guess you could say, in terms of the genus. Here's one of those plants that I studied it as one name and it's stuck permanently, but now they had to go and change it. So I learned this as Potentilla fructicosa, but it is actually now Dicephora fructicosa. So yeah, I probably will forever be calling this Potentilla, but I think they split it into its own genus, because this particular species is a short woody shrub, and as you can tell, it's got every diagnostic trait that we have discussed when it comes to Rosaceae. But I think they separated this into its own genus because what I know as Potentilla is actually an herbaceous perennial, and because this is woody, I think that was the decision. So I get it, but still. Our next native plant that is in Rosaceae is a very aptly named ocean spray. This is Holodiscus discolor, and it is quite an iconic plant and quite beautiful now that it's about to flower, and I love the texture of it. They remind me of a stilbe, if you're familiar with that perennial. Has a very similar inflorescence. And ocean spray here, so these have yet to open. In the next couple of days they'll open, and they'll pretty much kind of look the same as this, but then the bees will just be after them. So you can identify this in the landscape as very prominent, and as you can tell, or as you can see, there are the spent flowers from last year that persist. So even if it's not in peak bloom, you can look for these inflorescences. Northeast side of the hotel, we have our next plant, which is Karya Japonica pleniflora. So the double-flowered Karya. So this particular selection is probably the most common in the landscape. Very rarely do you see the single form, which I think is actually a little nicer, more elegant. And normally I like double flowers, but this is a little obnoxious. And it's a very rangy plant. We did a little bit of pruning on it, and it really does not have the most tidy habit. So, but you'll see it in the landscape. So that's why we study it. So very distinct leaves, actually, if it's not in flower. Very, very, very acuminate tip, lanceolate almost. And also during the winter, has very prominent canes that are persistent and are quite great. So when you try and identify this in the off season, sometimes the stems will kind of give it away. So if you look at this, for example, it's just your classic arching, yeah, blah. Anyway, it has some nice qualities for sure. Got a little husky theme going in here, but it's a little bit nicer over here. So it can have a nice effect. So let me take back my previous comment. So the genus Malus is pretty easy to identify, and apples are of course one of the most popular fruits. Of course we have the edible ones, and we also have the ornamental varieties, or the crab apples that we've often see. So those will see fruit, but they're more known for their flowers, I think, or actually both. But yeah, you can't mistake an apple. So this particular one that we have in our vegetable garden here, as you can see we have two of them. These are columnar selections, and to be honest, they're not that tasty. But they're very useful in the landscape because of their habit. They're far narrower, they don't get as large. You can grow them in a container, so they're very useful. So you're not having a huge tree to maintain and take care of. In the springtime, this was absolutely beautiful, covered in its flowers, and it's going to be covered in fruit too. But yeah, they're not really that tasty. So Malus apples, easy peasy. So we're here in the south side of the property here at the Center for Urban Hort, and I'm going to talk about this particular plant that specifically is not on your list, but the genus is. So I'd like to introduce you to the genus Physocarpus, and this is the 9-bark, and it's actually a native for us. And if you look closely, it's got everything that we're looking for in terms of Rosaceae. Flowers almost remind me of Crataegus, actually. So 5 petals, multiple stamens, and here born in umbels, actually. So you actually might confuse this with the genus Viburnum. It has a very, very similar growth habit and arrangement. It could be, the double file Viburnum, or the snowball Viburnum. So Viburnum opulus, there you go. It's blanking there for a sec. But main difference is, of course, let's look at leaf arrangement. This is alternate, and Viburnum would be opposite. So that's one. And if you look at the foliage, they are lobed and very similar in texture to, or shape actually, of a maple. And it's not maple because maples have opposite, but it also could remind you of a raspberry, yeah? So it could be a Rubus. But to identify Physocarpus, or 9-bark, look for all those diagnostic traits that we just discussed. But to me, what helps me identify 9-bark is the bark. If you look in the middle of the plant, you see the brown stems, and this sort of has this sort of peely quality to it. And the further down you look, you'll see the bark peeling. And so that's one trait to help identify this particular genus. But the cultivar that you're responsible for, I think Menlo is the cultivar name, but the trade name is Diablo, which is a dark purple, almost black foliage form that's very popular in the landscape. But this is the straight species that's native to us here in the Northwest. But yeah, so look for all these traits, but in black when you see it in your exam or in the landscape. So I'm actually rushing a little bit to try and get all the plants in, because we are actually opening up here at McMenamins. And so yeah, I won't get to, well, I mean, I still can. It just looks weird. People are kind of going around. I'm here with my selfie stick and talking to myself, so it's kind of weird. But anyway, our next plant is actually back there. the big purple thing. So let's look at it. Alright, so what we're looking at now is a very common tree in the landscape, and I refer to it as just the common purple blob that we see everywhere. So this common purple blob is the genus Prunus. So the cherries, basically. So this is Prunus cerasifera, and the cultivar that you have on your list is Thundercloud. And anyway, the common flowering plum. So, is that its common name? Yeah, close enough. So, of course, in springtime, just masses of beautiful pink flowers and the petals blowing in the wind. It's quite an iconic tree in bloom. But the rest of the season, it's this purple tree. Another edible member of Rosaceae, of trees in the Rosaceae. This is the genus Pyrus and the pears. So Pyrus and Malus are pretty distinct, but they can look very similar because so a pear tree, very similar at times to an apple tree. Let's look at the difference aside from the obvious fruits. This is actually an Asian pear, and we gave it a good prune, so we've sacrificed some fruit for the season, but you can see some developing. So let's compare it with Malus. So aside from the fruit, the foliage is actually very distinct between the two genera. So Pyrus tends to be not necessarily larger, but it's usually glossier, whereas Malus tends to be a little bit more pubescent. And the leaf shape too is very distinct. Pyrus tends to be a little rounder, more cordate and heart-shaped, and Malus tends to be more ovate. So that's one way to tell. The flowers are also very similar, but leaves should certainly give it away when you're trying to compare the two fruits. So of course we have several roses on our list to study, but I want to point one out that is quite distinct and quite wonderful in the landscape. So this is Rosa Glauca, and Glaucus, so aptly named, and it's a beautiful landscape plant, beautiful foliage. The flowers are nice, simple, pink, 5 petals, many stamens, ho-hum. You know, don't get me wrong, it's beautiful, but once it sets fruits and creates its hips, it's actually quite attractive. But this is the main appeal of this plant. So it's very plant combination friendly, and it's a plant that you can actually take way back down and prune, so you get this nice flush of foliage for the season. So, Rosa Glauca. I am following my nose to our next member of the genus Rosa. This is Rosa Rugosa, and it is one of the common species of roses that you'll see. And we're looking at the white form, which is it's typically the pink form is more common, but I've chosen the white just because it's a little different. But this is a rose that is an absolute workhorse in the landscape, and as you can see, I planted it in mass, and it does sucker, and it's one of those roses that you just kind of let it do its thing. And it's also another great plant to put in between neighbors you don't like. They are prickly as heck, as you can see, and it's a pretty multi-season interest plant. So here it's in bud and it's in full bloom, and I'll show you a few cultivars. I see a few blooming right now, but one thing that this particular species is really known for are its gorgeous, gorgeous hips. This basically the term we use to describe the fruit of the rose. And you can see, look at these sepals. Oh my gosh, they're like It's like a sea creature. So let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 or 6? Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. Okay, it looks like they just sort of fused together. So, anywho, these turn a brilliant orange-red when they're ripe, and they're edible, high in vitamin C, supposedly. And Rugosa is very easy to identify, even because you'll often see it planted in beaches, close to shores, because it tolerates salt very well, and so they've planted them there, so they look like they would be native, but they're not. Here. So this, you guys, is your typical Rosa Rugosa. You've seen this before, yeah? So obviously just finishing up and hips beginning to develop. So there are various selections of it. Here's one of them that's a very attractive double. And Rosa Rugosa is also quite fragrant. So really lovely in the landscape. And also the best part really about Rosa Rugosa is its disease resistance. It is practically black spot mildew free. And let's look at the leaves, because basically that's how it gets its name. Highly textured rugose, as we say, hence the species name. And so yeah, quite attractive. So as you explore roses in the landscape, you will probably encounter a very popular series known as the Knockout series of roses. And these have been bred to basically be indestructible. And of course, you can easily tell that it's a rose. They're usually semi-double, singles, sort of fluffy, but they're known to continually bloom throughout the season, to be very disease resistant and very easy to care for. And actually people will just mow these with a mower sometimes to prune them early in the season, and they'll come right back and bloom. So it's this constant need for color that people want that has made the Knockout rose one of the most popular and commercially successful roses out there. If you talk to a purist of roses, and I don't know if I consider myself one, but you mentioned Knockout roses and they'll probably spit in your face. No, I'm kidding. They're just... look how boring it is. I'm sorry. So yes, it's colorful, easy to care for, etc. And oh my god, I was died, jerk. So, and the main thing is, it has no scent. Maybe if you close your eyes and use your imagination, you'll pick up something. And it has its use in the landscape. I shouldn't put it down, but you will encounter them. This is actually rainbow Knockout, I believe, but it's typically pink, and there might be a white one, and I don't know. So you can tell I'm really selling these plants well. But as you can see, in a parking island, if you need color, low maintenance, it works. But meh. Let's look at a few more. Pause. Sneaky. Southeast cotton chalice. Okay. Anyway, so 2 more members of edible Rosaceae, and this one's on your list: Rubus, Idias, or the raspberries. So pretty easy to tell if you have eaten raspberries and love them, and there's nothing like fresh raspberries in my opinion. So you really should grow it. They're pretty expensive, and the problem with them is they can take over. So let's look at some developing fruit, and we can see more diagnostic traits of Rosaceae very present. So if you look at the sepals, there are 5, and it's finished blooming. But if we look at another Rubus, it's the Blackberries. And this particular one, by the way, is one called Triple Crown, and it's an absolutely wonderful look. Thornless blackberry. So, not like the horrid Himalayan blackberry that we're all trying to get rid of. But you can see, look, classic Rosaceae right there. 5 petals, 5 sepals, and multiple stamens in the center, and an aggregate fruit, of course. So, Rubus, quite delicious, quite invasive, but very rosaceous for sure. Alright, so we're in the north end of the property here, and this is where heaters go to die, basically. And it's predominantly shade, and a few natives, a few exotics, but I'm walking, so Riz has a plant hoarding problem. Ooh, hey birdies. Alright, let's look at another member of the Rosaceae. So, another Rubus. Look at this. Classic. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 sepals. Multiple stamens. This is Rubus, I believe. Rubus parviflorus. And thimbleberry. Alright, the next member of Rosaceae that I would like to talk about looks very much like a raspberry, and in a way it is. It's the same genus. Oh my goodness, look how pretty that is, backlit. So this is one of our wonderful natives. So actually in fruit right now, and you can kind of see why. It's called Salmon Berry. So this is Rubus spectabilis, and it is a very prolific, very aggressive plant actually. Let's look at it in shade. The light was beautiful, but let's look at the diagnostic traits more closely. So it's basically a golden raspberry with a little hint of orange and red in it that gives it its common name, salmon berry. And so very easy to identify in the landscape, even when it's dormant actually. It has these brown stems, and then of course they flower very early in the season. And here's another look at the plant, and has these beautiful pink flowers that just really stand out at the base. And oh my gosh, I just saw, I actually want to eat this right now. They are edible. Oh lordy, stupid camera. Okay, I'm gonna hold the phone. Oh god, this is really awkward. Okay. Focus. Doesn't that look yummy? Alright, so that is the salmon berry. And okay, oops. Taste test. It's very seedy. It's seedy, a little tart, somewhat flavorless. But anyway, they're edible. Some people claim that they're very good, but if you collect enough, maybe you can, cook it down, add a little sugar, and I'm sure it'll be fabulous. So that is Rubus spectabilis for you. Really neat plant, one of our wonderful, beautiful natives. And let's look at it backlit again. Oh, so beautiful. And then the fruit. So imagine that salmon berry backlit. Just looks scrumptious. Unfortunately, it's not that tasty, but can't have everything. So I'm kind of bummed that you're only learning one species of this genus here. So this is mountain ash, or the genus Sorbus, and the one on your list is Sorbus Alcapurrias. And I just want to talk about the genus in general so you recognize it in the landscape. So what you see here, the compound leaves with the multiple leaflets, is sort of the general look of Sorbus. But what gives Sorbus away, and what's really known for, are the fruits and that develop. So obviously these have just formed and are yet to ripen. but they have the most incredible fruit. Some of my favorite species of Sorbus are actually the Asian species, a lot of them from China, that have the most exquisite clusters of fruit that are very colorful, really attractive, and also a lot of Sorbus have really pretty good fall color. So they're very useful and very beautiful in the landscape. But this is kind of what you want to look for with Sorbus. Pay attention to this texture, the leaflets, and compare it to other genera that might be very similar. It's very easy to confuse this with members of Fabaceae because it looks like it could be, you know, the Albizia or what's that one that's going right now? Dang it, it's in the tip of my tongue. And some of you are probably like yelling at it, the name at it. But Pseudoacacia, dang it, why am I forgetting the genus? Okay, as I stop this, I'm gonna remember. But anyway, big difference is the fruit, obviously. So here, there's a few more examples up there, but here, let's look at this cluster here. The fruit being formed is more, you know, you don't have the pods that that Fabaceae would produce. So, and then if you look closely at the fruit, at the very base, if I can actually get this to focus. What's the problem? Okay, there we go. You can actually see that it's a little itty bitty like apple. So yeah, that's the genus Sorbus. I want to show you our work in progress here in the bog garden. You can see the pitcher plants are looking awesome. And we have a few more that we're going to put in, so I'm quite excited about it. Alright, our next plant is this one right here. So this is the genus Spirea, and there's many different Spirea in the landscape, but this one is quite distinct. I'm going to keep walking and look at another one. You can see we've repeated the plantings here, but I think this is actually quite a nice combination. So Ceanothus there in the background. So this is Spirea thunbergii, and the cultivar is Ogon, or gold. So the golden leaf Thunberg's Spirea. And obviously it's not blooming now, and the flowers are pretty much spent, but one thing to look for in identifying this plant is the alternate leaf arrangement and the very lanceolate leaves. But to me, I often will look at the stem. So if you look closely, closer to the middle of the plant, it's brown. So, and then as it matures, it gets more green. So it's the brown stems that kind of help me give this, help me identify this plant and kind of gives it away. But the texture of it is also quite nice. And if you look at the overall habit, it doesn't get very tall, and it's about 3 feet, 4 feet high, maybe, and about the same wide. But yeah, quite distinct. And I'm trying to think of a plant that you might confuse it with. You know, perhaps maybe the sumac, which we looked at in the Anacardiaceae, the genus Rus. So color's the same, the texture is very similar, but with Spirea thunbergii Ogon, yeah, look for the stems. And in some ways, the flowers that have been spent, are still present. So if you look closely, yoink. Okay, I don't know how well this is gonna work. Haha, actually it does. If you look at it closely, count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Boom, Rosaceae.